We've been told that this government is still taking healthcare workers off the front lines, away from patient care, and forcing them into Kaizen basics training, where they're forced to memorize Japanese terminology and full paper airplanes. This government is still forcing nurses and other healthcare professionals to memorize words like hijunka, jidoko, mudu, and pokiyoki. And folding paper airplanes is still very much part of the Kaizen basic lean training that we see promoted by this government. Wow. Here's an example of what the highly trained health professionals are told of the John Black Kaizen training, Mr. Speaker. Healthcare workers are told that when there is an empty box of supplies, quote, it signals that it needs to be replenished, end quote. Well, no kidding, Mr. Speaker. As if highly trained health professionals did not know that an empty box of supplies meant that it needed to be replenished. The nonsense from this government, Mr. Speaker, keeps mounting day after day when it comes to this project. And sadly, so too do the expenses related to this project. The Deputy Premier beside him says, well, what do you have against professional development? Right. Nothing against professional development, Mr. Speaker, but this isn't professional development. Forcing workers, Mr. Speaker, to learn Japanese words in full paper airplanes is doing nothing to improve the quality of care here in Saskatchewan.
Even in its peak year in 2010-11, it cost the government just $6,600 to operate the hyperbaric chamber that whole year. That's it. Yet it saves the government a tremendous amount of money because this treatment reduces the need for amputations and helps people heal more quickly. To the Minister, why won't this government reverse its decision and keep this vital public service in our province?
A new report commissioned by the Agricultural Producers Association of Saskatchewan, Sask Wheat, Sask Pulse and Sask Barley shows that the big rail companies are overcharging grain producers. To the Agriculture Minister, does he agree with me that $2 billion taken from the pockets of farmers and put into the coffers of the big rail companies as a result of overcharging is absolutely outrageous? And will he push the federal Conservatives for a full costing review and the appropriate adjustment to the maximum revenue entitlement so that Saskatchewan farmers don't keep losing out?
Kay Schumacher is 89 years old. Her daughter-in-law Terry is here today. Elizabeth Martins is 92 years old. Her daughter Betsy Ryan is here today. And Ray Chirpin is 84 years old. His daughter Eva Maistel is here today. Kay, Elizabeth and Ray live in the Prairie Pioneer Lodge in Swift Current. Their family members have traveled to the legislature today because they're tired of hearing this government pretend that problems in seniors' care are isolated. They talk about residents, Mr. Speaker, not being properly fed their entire meals, or not even getting lunch until 3:30 in the afternoon because the aides were simply run off their feet. And they see staff doing everything that they absolutely can, but they just can't keep up.
Betsy Ryan was a family participant in 2 John Black workshops. She was asked to be a part of other workshops, but declined because she saw how ridiculous it all is, and she was especially frustrated that most of the changes don't stick. Each one of these workshops cost $34,000, over and above the John Black contract, and each of these workshops involves over 2 weeks of work from the government's Legion of Lean specialists. This government's $40 million American Lean consultant also has closet organizing workshops. Those are called 5S processes, and they last 5 days. Betsy has seen the same closet space at Prairie Pioneer Lodge reorganized several times. The last 5S closet reorganizing process even involved the Health Region's CEO. To the Health Minister, how does that make any sense?
So the minister says they're going to pause this for a short period of time to give them more information about their decision. That's not consultation, Mr. Speaker. It's absolutely unacceptable for that government to fill that facility and to make this change within this neighbourhood without listening and working directly with the community and hearing the very valid risks about safety.
We think of Adrian Seaborn, Savannah Gunderson, Emily Krushelnicki, Jesse Selwood, Margaret Fraze, Lauren Rowell, Irene Hahn, Art Healy, Fern Shingoose, and Margaret Warholm. These are just some of the people who have come forward and shared their horrible stories, Mr. Speaker. And our heart breaks for them, Mr. Speaker, but we need a government that pulls its head out of the sand and actually realizes what its actions have done and the reality for so many seniors here in the province. My question to the Premier, how many more families have to come forward with their tragic stories? How much more heartbreak and sadness do we have to see before we can see this government bring in regulated staffing levels, minimum care standards, and better investments when it comes to seniors' care here in Saskatchewan?
With record revenues over the past number of years, we should have the best schools in the country. And we certainly shouldn't have overcrowded classrooms and schools propped up with 2x4s and 2x6s and a top-secret list of $1.5 billion of needed repairs. How can the Education Minister explain the disconnect between the government's record revenues and the growing challenges in our schools? Why have they failed to get the job done where it counts the most?
This government has been neglecting what really matters in health care, seniors' care and education. At the same time, it has been pouring untold millions into wasteful pet projects like the John Black Lean Project. Earlier this week, we showed that this government is still taking healthcare workers off the front lines and forcing them into John Black Lean training, which involves memorizing Japanese words. And yesterday, Mr. Speaker, we learned why. The second health minister said this government believes it's easier for our healthcare workers to communicate with each other in Japanese rather than English. Really? Does this minister seriously think that it's easier for our healthcare workers to communicate with each other in Japanese? Could the minister please explain how this makes any sense?
The independent provincial auditor said this government has dramatically increased spending on consultants, and 70% of the time this government is not even documenting why those consultants are being hired. So there's not even a proper paper trail for why the consultants were hired or what exactly they're supposed to be delivering. This government has created an all-you-can-eat buffet for its friends in consulting companies, and Saskatchewan people are being stuck with the tab. Again, to the minister, how can she possibly explain why this government isn't even documenting the reasons why it's hiring the consultants in the first place?
We're grateful that this government changed its mind and agreed to support the legislation put forward by the Leader of the Opposition for a monthly buy local day. We hope this government will also change its mind on the bill put forward by our Deputy Leader, which would fix this government's procurement policy so that Saskatchewan businesses don't keep losing out to out-of-province corporations. We want this government to restore a film employment tax credit, and we want them to finally get serious about education training opportunities for First Nations and Métis people.
This budget is about misplaced priorities instead of focusing on what really matters. Opportunity for young people, affordability for families, security for seniors. Mr. Speaker, because Saskatchewan families and the people of this province deserve better, the official opposition won't be supporting this budget.
We have heard story after story after story about a quality of seniors' care that is far from adequate in this province. And the independent provincial ombudsman has heard those stories too. One of the biggest complaints which the opposition and the ombudsman are hearing is about extremely low staff-to-resident ratios. Just this week, we had family members travel from Swift Current to raise concerns about inadequate staffing levels. Yesterday's budget had just $1 million for non-capital needs in seniors' care facilities. This government has spent $3 million on the Premier's American lobbyist. It has spent $4 million on John Black's travel and accommodation. It has handed a $5 million research grant to the failed American smart meter manufacturer, but it only has $1 million for seniors' care.
Year after year after year, this government has cut funding for climate change programs. Just since the 2013-14 budget, climate change funding has almost been cut in half. So it's no wonder why more and more people are starting to question whether this government even believes in climate change. After all, the newly minted Sask Party candidate for Stonebridge, Dakota, says climate change is a myth based on, her words, witchcraft reasoning. To the Environment Minister, does this government believe that climate change is a myth based on witchcraft reasoning, and is that why we've seen cut after cut to climate change programs?
With the kind of windfall resource revenues that we've had in this province, Mr. Speaker, year after year after year, we should have some of the best resourced classrooms in the country, Mr. Speaker. We shouldn't have schools propped up with 2x4s as we do in Prairie Spirit. We shouldn't have cuts to EAL when we know that there are more and more students who need those supports.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker.
Please state your point of order.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Earlier in question period, the Premier used language that he ought to know was unparliamentary language in referring to the the Leader of the Opposition, I would ask you to make a ruling.